Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. So this is hopefully going to be the second part of our sort of story of how we got into property. And I think in the first part, Stuart, you were saying that you chose to get into property with the desire to replace your day job, so you could you have more flexibility in your time and still have a suitable income. And thinking about that, I'm curious, how much planning, how much financial forecasting and things did you do around the time you were making those decisions? So you said that you'd started with a simple buy-to-let, but then had to change your strategy. So had you worked out what it would take to meet your goals if you carried on with the buy-to-let strategy, the simple single lets?
When you say the word planning, I just have to chuckle because I'm not the best planner in the world. I'm more of a doer and then look back. But of course, when it came to doing this and having a family, I had to do an element of planning. So there was a monthly revenue goal, which I sort of planned out, and I look back on it now and just realise how naive it was. But so, of course, with 4 kids and a mortgage, you're going to need to do some planning. So I kind of planned into my leaving of full-time employment the selling of our residential property. I'm very fortunate to have a wife that was very understanding of that. So that gave me, a pot of money as well to work with and plan with. So short answer to your question is, did a little bit of planning. Looking back, not enough. Absolutely not enough. And massively overestimating, how quickly I could get to the revenue goals, and B, the amount of effort it would take to reach those goals.
So did your planning get as far as having a sort of a number of single lets you would need to cover your income goals? As in, did you know you needed 5 of them or 10 of them or 100 of them or whatever, or had you not really gone to that level?
Well, once I'd selected, the student accommodation market as the route forward, then everything I did was based on room rates. Mm-hmm. So, I knew that to get close to where I wanted to get to, I would need X number of rooms. And my initial target was 100 rooms. Mm-hmm. And within 18 months, we got to 37. I was expecting to get to 100 rooms, in less than a year, which I look back on now and just think, that's crazy.
Well, what do you think was so crazy about it? What is it that has just taken so much longer than you expected?
Well, what was crazy about it? So I wouldn't say it's impossible. I'm sure it can be done, but I think crazy to think you can. Well, for me, go from a standing start to 100 rooms, as in purchasing 100 rooms. So there's lots of different strategies you can use, and we've mentioned these on previous episodes. And rent to rent, for example, and that's something avenue I'm looking at now to hit those room goals. But what made that impossible was because my model at the time, and is largely still my model, is a standard model. So you buy the property, you put deposit down, pay for everything else, you refurb the house, and then you let the rooms. So that was the first piece of sort of naivety, thinking, not realising just how much funding I would need. And, I did pretty well on the funding stage, to be honest, with investors. Got, close to 250, 300,000 when I needed it. But the second element of my naivety was just how much money would stay in the property. And we've touched on this in the past. And even if you're buying really well, and I'm not saying I was buying really well, some of them probably didn't buy as well as I could have, but a couple of them I think I did and got revalued really well. But there was always money left on the table. We've touched on it before. So, those two things meant that actually the money couldn't go as far as it needed to, and therefore we couldn't get the rooms. And then the final piece of that jigsaw was the amount of costs coming out of the business, which is actually why I kind of put the growth of the business on hold to sort that out. So I would say that I'm running on average around a 30% margin, and that just means that of the total revenue, the gross revenue I receive from the rent roll, I net at about 30% EBITDA, so before tax and everything else, which isn't as high as I thought it was going to be. And on some properties, it's lower than that, so it's not great. So they were my learnings.
Okay, so I'm surprised slightly that they're so finance focused. I would have thought that there might have been some in there relating to sort of the time and effort it takes to actually go through the purchasing process and indeed the investor finding process and things like that. Especially since during this time you hadn't given up your day job, you were in a transitional state. Did you not find that too much trouble, or?
Well, I think that was part of it.
Forgotten those bits.
I guess I'd probably partly forgotten them, but I think I expected those. I expected the time, and the truth is, I had sold my residential property and was had purchased a property and I was in the purchasing cycle of the next one when I gave the job up. So it was a very much a burn the ships moment for me, where it was like. And I'm the sort of person where I needed that. I needed the fire under my backside to make me really do what I needed to do. If I could go back, I'd probably do the same thing again, but I'd probably just be a little bit more meticulous about the funding I had and working out, because even today, the property business doesn't fully cover what it needs to cover. And that's just my business learning as opposed to my property learning, which, from our discussions, I think, is very different to how you've approached it, because you've probably done it a lot more in a much more measured and thought out way.
I don't think it's that much more measured or thought out, more just slower.
Well, that too.
So why don't we try and fill in the gaps a bit? So your property journey, sort of main property journey, started about 3 years ago, is that right?
2016, yeah.
Okay, so a bit more than 3 years. So can you sort of walk us through those few years? What did you buy all of your rooms within the first few months, or has it been gradual, and how have they built up over time?
Yeah, so as mentioned on the last episode, we had our first sort of rental property from 2007. Well, my wife owned that from 2003, but we took over the management of that in 2007. So we were landlords from 2007. I think it was probably around 2015 actually when I started the process of the purchases of the little flat. And then I bought the 5-bed house in 2016, and that's when I kind of thought, okay, this is going to be the route forward. So I would have handed in my notice then, and actually my boss at the time didn't let me go. So every time we hit the 3 months, it's like, can you just give me another 3 months? Can you? So actually, I think I originally handed in my notice in 2015, and I wasn't let go until 2016, summer of 2016. Then I handed in my notice, and I think I was buying the next 5-bed flat, which was going to turn into student accommodation. So then I would say, so if we had 5 rooms, I probably purchased enough property for 22 rooms within the next sort of year to 16 months. So I just went really hard at it, thinking that was going to just solve the problem. But for all of the reasons mentioned before, because I hadn't really sat down and looked at the actual costs. I mean, part of me just thought, it's fine. I'll buy the properties. I'll fill the rooms. It's going to be fine. Which, I want to slap myself in the face for, because that's not how any business works. It's certainly not how property business works. And thank God for that, because it means you have to do it properly. So I probably purchased around 20 odd rooms in that time. And in fact, with another JV partner, overall we got to 37 rooms by, back end of 2018. So in that time, probably would have bought about enough properties for 32 rooms. So there was a 2-bed in there. I bought a 13-bed, which obviously is going to accelerate things.
Yeah, that's cheating, I think, really.
But that's when my modus operandi was as many rooms as possible. And without going into it here, but the models, the models changed down in that area. So big houses aren't as appealing to the market I was going for in students. But yeah, so that 13 bed would have added to it. So yeah, so rapidly grew. And the gross rent roll, if you look at it, is very healthy. It's what goes under that, and the amount of costs. Lots happened in the last year or so.
Yeah, so I think if my mental time tracking is right, that means you haven't bought anything, or haven't bought any student rooms anyway, to add to that, for about a year.
Where are we? Yeah, that would be about right. Probably a little bit more than that, but pretty much, yeah, that's right.
Okay, so was that a conscious decision to stop buying?
Yeah, so it's exactly as I said it before, was that there was a lot of money being left in properties that I wasn't expecting. And also with investors, those pesky investors always want their money. And they always want interest. And that puts additional cost pressure on the business. So I actively said, right, I'm just going to, use a long word, have a moratorium on, purchasing. Let's just get this business sorted. And that's what we've done for the last sort of 12 months, just really working on costs, which is all the basic stuff, making sure, I've had to negotiate down agency fees more than once to get those down to a reasonable level, utility bills, still working on those, and, occupancy levels, making sure, because when you've got that many rooms and you've got quite a few rooms in different houses, there are naturally going to be houses that won't be 100%. So, for example, one of my properties is a 7-bed, and that's got a group of 6 students in it. It's going to be very hard to get someone that's just going to want to go into a room that's already got 6 friends in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So some of those,
even more than general HMOs, and I think that's bad enough.
Yeah, and that's it. But I will take the hit on that, because, to be honest, 6 out of 7 is pretty good on that size property for me. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'd want 100%, but in a student property, the upside is that when students sign into those properties, they're signing 50-week terms. So I don't run the risk of, I've only got a void period of 2 weeks, for example, on those 6 beds. Yeah. So obviously, we work on occupancy, but that's what I've been sorting out. As you know from other meetings we have, that's what I've been focused on. In the last year.
Do you just mention sort of the 50-week contract and occupancy levels? Do you or have you had issues at all with students dropping out sort of mid-year and going back on those contracts? Or?
I've only had it once, and so in that time, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, definitely.
And it wasn't that they reneged on a contract, it was just that they left at the end of a term without paying for the final term, which wasn't an insignificant amount of money, I seem to remember. So it was over the £1,500 mark, which, relatively speaking, is not huge amounts, but there's a principle to it, which is you don't live somewhere and expect to live there for free. I don't think, for most of the time, unless that's the agreement.
Seemingly not everyone agrees, but yes.
So this student just left, and unfortunately they were guarantored by someone that wasn't a resident of this country. So, I spoke with the agent about it, who were okay, but they'd kind of done what they thought was the right thing, sent the letters out, and they just kind of, essentially they just handed it back to me and just said, look, this is what it is. If you want to chase this down in the court, fill your boots, but it's probably going to cost you more than you're going to get back. So, rightly or wrongly, I took matters into my own hands and reached out to the student via a well-known social media platform. And to his credit, he responded, and I sent him an email. And I'd like to think, I positioned myself fairly and just said, look, this is how it's been, and followed up on those emails. And long story short, we came to an agreement where he paid half of it, which I saw as a win.
I think that's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah. So, because I'll be honest, at that stage, once a few months had elapsed and, we know life continues, the world keeps turning, I was continuing out of principle, if I'm being completely honest. It was just a principle of the matter, which was, look, you have lived in this place, you have used the facilities, we did provide you with the things that we provide you with in terms of, TV in the room and broadband and so on. So it's kind of like, you have used the services. Yeah. And I know this might sound strange, but the real truth is, because I know he was a young guy, and I was thinking about that when I was communicating with him, thinking, this could be in the future one of my children. As in, how would I want them to be treated? And I thought, I think there's a lesson here. And for me, the lesson to him was, and I tried to, and I treated him with as much respect as you could, and he proved himself to be a very respectful person by how he communicated back. It was one of these. He just said, "Look, I don't have any money. I've just left university, etc., etc." My point back to him was, "Look, that's fine, but you had funding for the accommodation, so play that out. I've been a student myself, not at university, but I was a student, and I know what I did with some of those grant checks, and they didn't go on accommodation. But in the end, I always paid my bills, and that's kind of how I ended up with this tenant, which I just said, look, appreciate you're in a tricky situation. However, I think it's only right and proper that you fund the payment, and my next course of action would be to take you to court." And, I expressed to them that if that happened, things like CCJs, and I didn't, yes, there was an element of, probably a fear factor, but it was kind of just saying, look, that's the next stage. And I was really clear, and I just said, look, I have children and I wouldn't want to put them through this situation. So let's come to an agreement. I don't want to go down that road. I said, I genuinely don't want to go down that road. And I'm sure you don't. And we came out to an agreement.
Yeah, having been through the court process a couple of times for with tenant issues, and then it's best avoided if you can. It's just long and full of hassle, apart from anything else.
Well, no one wants to do it because who's winning the most is the legal professionals, and that's their profession. But we don't want to hemorrhage money in those ways if we can help it, or time.
No, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the time and the stress is, I think, the bigger issue. Certainly on the small claims sort of route. The costs are not very high. But,
and for me, the principle was, hopefully, the learning passed down was you can't just walk away from these things and expect it just to disappear. And I'm sure he's taken that and moved on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
So I think that brings us pretty much up to date for you, isn't it? You've now got 37 student rooms. Yeah. Plus how many single lets?
3.
And you've got one flip in progress at the moment?
One flip in progress and another purchase in progress at the moment.
Okay, cool.
I didn't realise that until you asked those questions. I never think about it like this because I always think, there's not much going on. And then you say that and I'm like, actually, we've got a few things going on, yeah.
Yeah, you sound quite busy to me, yeah. It's going to make my story sound very boring in comparison.
So, Mr. Pither, we heard the start of your story, so that's a great segue into yours. So we heard about your, I guess, early insight into just getting lodgers to pay for your mortgage, which you did, and purchased another property at that time. So, what happened next? So,
my first property purchase was my own house, which you say had lodgers in, and that was around 2002. I think a couple of years later, I remortgaged that, bought my second one. That was a dedicated single let from the start. And then I had quite a big gap before I did anything else. And during that time, I was just focused a lot more on my career, and I think also in this bit, I'm not 100% certain on the dates, having not looked them up in advance, because we do lots of preparation for these. But I think also that gap was also where I started a family. So inevitably that distracts one a bit. But somewhere, some years later, I think in the region of 2010-ish, I did get another property, and this one was with the help of my parents. So my parents have been landlords for quite a few years, and rather than me putting up the deposit for this one, they put up the deposit as a gift. So I kind of cheated a bit on this one, but that's my third single let property. And then fast forwarding a few more years, so this was 2017, I think, was my next proper purchase. So this was again deposit funded by a bit of savings and a bit of remortgaging. And this is my first one purchased around this area, so in Red Hill. This one needed a bit of a refurb, but despite needing a bit of a refurb, it actually came with tenants. So this was the first time I'd bought a property with tenants. So that was a new experience, but it went very smoothly. And well, I say very smoothly. Actually, the purchase process went relatively smoothly, but the communications with those existing tenants, I think I could have done better, and the selling agent could have done better. In so much as when I did finally get to talk to them, they seemed not to really be sure whether they were going to be able to stay or whether they had to move out or what was going to happen around that. So I did reassure them that they're very welcome to stay and things, and they did for a little while, but I think they'd already sort of set things in motion in their minds, at least, that they were probably not
because
staying
they've been
there
unsettled.
long-term. Yeah, I think so, that kind of thing. So they only stayed for, I don't know, a few months, certainly less than 6 months after I purchased it. But once they'd moved out, that was made the refurb much easier. So it didn't need anything major. I moved things around a bit in the kitchen, got all the wiring checked, which needed some changes. But apart from that, it was really just a decoration throughout. I mean, a full redecoration, but it wasn't anything sort of more fundamental than that. I didn't change any bathrooms or anything like that. There was painting, carpets, that sort of thing. There was some leaks in conservatory roof and things like that needed dealing with. But yeah, other than that, that was not too much effort or too much hassle. And once that was all done, it relet relatively easily. It has been through a couple of sets of tenants, I think, since then.
So this was around 2010, did you say?
No, this one was 2017.
Oh, 2017, right, okay. So
this is the one in Red Hill, so the most recent one.
And the one that your parents was with?
No, not the one my parents.
That was 2010-ish.
That was 2010-ish, and that one's based in Eastbourne.
Right.
And again, my parents managed that one for me, so I have far less in the way of active knowledge of that one and what happens there. I just find out when the tenants are coming or going, and when there are issues with the rent or other expenses and bits and pieces, rather than being hands-on so much.
Yeah.
But the one in Red Hill was my next chance to be sort of hands-on with the property. But the current tenants have been there over a year, maybe just coming up to a year. So that's all looking good and settled. And as we've mentioned elsewhere, I'm trying to sort out funds to buy something else now.
Yeah, exciting.
It is, if slightly challenging at times.
Yeah, property.
Indeed, there's another property that I own with my brother, which we mentioned before, that we're hoping to try and sell, and we have had an off-market offer on that, but it is quite a lot lower than we were hoping for. So we're currently having those discussions as to how we want to handle that and what we want to do with that. And
where did that come from?
I'm not sure how much I want to divulge, just in case anyone's listening. But so someone else who we've known previously, and had thought might be interested in purchasing this particular property. They have another property close by, so yeah, we approached them and said we're thinking of selling. We know you've sort of spoken about possibly being interested in the past. Would you actually properly seriously be interested? And they've come back and said yes, probably would, but yeah, at a much lower offer than we were hoping.
Won't ask you any more on that subject.
Yeah, as I desperately make sign language. Stop talking.
Yeah. No, I'm just interested because I think when someone says off market, it's always interesting to know how these things happen, but it's generally.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, this is pre-existing contacts. We've known them for years.
Yeah.
So it's
just
not.
Make that very clear for any estate agent listening. These were pre-existing relationships. It already happened.
Yes, great. Yeah, and it wasn't anyone sort of putting leaflets through our door or any of the other approaches you sometimes hear about for people to find off-market properties. This was an existing relationship.
Good.
So I think that's probably the end of my story as well, and looking at the clock, probably the end of this episode as well.
Seems about right.
Fantastic. So where can people find the show notes, Stuart?
Thebusinessofproperty.com.